Good evening. What does an Arabian tale have to do with recent events in Kazakhstan? Little at first thought, but there is a connection. Therefore, I will rely on the viewer's vulnerable patience if, along the path to a conclusion, by indirection I will try to find directions out, as Polonius directs a member of his household to do. The task being to spy on Polonius' son Laertes while Laertes is visiting Paris. Many may recall, in the Shakespearean spirit, Macbeth's plea to the witches: if you can look into the seeds of time and see which grain would grow and which will not, followed by Macbeth's questioning them about his future and related prospects. The witches' reply are cryptic, but in the end they will prove remarkably accurate in precisely foreseeing Macbeth's tragic end. I am not inclined to anticipate futurity and exalt possibility to certainty, because if the predictions prove inaccurate, the ensuing disappointment is always proportional to the preceding confidence. And yet, there are events hiding within themselves a secret power that shapes the future in a seemingly mysterious way, similar to the secret energy of the wind that makes the visible world move under the violence of the invisible. During a relatively short time of my youth, my employer gave me the responsibility to develop the market for a large corporation, the market in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Now, Europe being already reasonably well developed, I was first directed to develop Eastern Europe and the Middle East. And it is in this context that I acquired the direct experience of people and places in Russia. However one's experience limited may be when referring to a country whose widths extend over 11-hour circles. As for the Middle East, I had visited the area before, and it had left a deep impression with me, because when we are young we are prone to dream, and on the literature side I associated the Middle East with the Arabian tales, and on the musical side especially with Russian composers, for example the Sherazade, the orchestral suite by Rimsky-Korsakov. In fact, associating a place, a landscape, or an image with a psychologically suited music, embodying the feeling that the visual impression conveys, is one among my useless habits. And it began during my first working adventures, if ever work can be called an adventure in the Middle East in this case. And here is a very short example of what I mean of Kazakh architecture and associated music. This was a temple built in the 1400s by the famous Emperor Tamerlan to honor a poet. Furthermore, Arabic architecture, cities and towns with women all shrouded in black, suggesting ghosts whose mode of operation is to appear by day rather than by night. The Arabic Quranic script decorating the mosques, where words themselves are transformed into art. The plaintive call to prayer from the minarets or from television sets, and the cryptic, non-understandable nature of the language. All this together prompted within me the naive perception of walking or living inside the book, at least temporarily, something like the Arabian tales, the 1001 Nights. In fact, the Arabic script itself is not only artistic, but it suggests the esoteric, the esoteric is not an insignificant component of religions. And here is one example, not in Arabia though. Not far from Turin in Italy, there is a medieval abbey called the Abbey of Vezzolano, built among hills in a wooded landscape. And in one of the rosettes, as they are called in architecture, there is inscribed several times the name of Mohammed in Arabic. I think it's fair to say that it is doubtful that the sculptor or decorator wanted to promote a conversion of Christianity to Islam, but he was probably so attracted by the script itself as to make it part of his decorative skills, so to speak. There are other examples of Arabic lettering in medieval architecture in Italy. I showed one here to demonstrate that the Arabic script has an inherent aesthetic component independently of what the words may mean. As for Russia, I visited Moscow a few times before McDonald opened his first fast food joint in 1989 in Pushkinskaya Square in Moscow. In itself, this is an insult to Pushkin, a Russian classic poet, possibly comparable to Wordsworth in English, to Leopardi in Italian, and maybe to Mallarmé in French literature. And when that happened, I mean the opening of the first Russian McDonald, an inside voice suggested a parallel with the prediction of Macbeth's witches. For in my view, and in a flash, that McDonald signaled the end of the Soviet Union. Now, a skeptic reader may suspect that I'm making this up, but I do not. Besides, I have another work-related similar precedent, this time in Iran, during the very last years before the Islamic Revolution. The project I was given to was to open an office in Tehran to help the local distributor take advantage of the large opportunities offered by the government in terms of military and electronic procurements. My employer built electronic instrumentation applicable in research in the military and telecommunication. Or rather I should say we, because I was allowed to hire help in the form of a very well qualified English engineer who moved to Tehran with his family, we opened the office. And during those 2 years of operation before the revolution, business prospered. However, on the other side of good, there were observable phenomena in Tehran completely at odds with the local culture. I rated it as the visual and palpable equivalent, in my opinion, of musical instruments annoyingly out of tune with the orchestra it is presently playing with. For example, along the main thoroughfare, the Broadway of Tehran, McDonald and other US fast food joints were in operation, along with fashion stores of notable European brands showing displays plainly at odds, when not offensive to the average taste, let alone the religion of the local inhabitants. Plus, nightclubs with dancers, as they were called, imported from Europe and injected tutgurt into Iranian culture. During business meetings or receptions held in the northern and most opulent part of the city, it was clear that the Iranian attendees felt as belonging to a different class than other Iranians, and of course superior. In my view, they attempted to appear or imitate in demeanor what they perceived to be the average American or average European behavior, self-centered and irreverent, as if the rest of Iran and of Iranians were something below their status. I know I am generalizing, but I don't think I was mistaken in the perception. Something similar occurs with some politicians at large. Hypocrisy forces most politicians to make loud and ostentatious professions of love and respect for the people considered as a body, accompanied, however, by a profession of disregard for the same people when considered as individuals. In one of my last reports on the status of the Tehran office and future prospects, I wrote that business still looked good, though I could not predict for how long, because due to a general mood that one could sense more than explain, the social situation could be compared to a volcano, signaling an imminent eruption. I cannot claim any merit for the accuracy of the prediction, because the conditions, the contrast between the fake Hollywood lifestyle in one limited geographic section of the city, I mean Tehran, and the rest, was blatantly obvious even to the most uninterested, pro-West, neoliberal, consumer fanatic and biased observer. And we know what happened in Iran in 1979. Now, I spent this time before talking of Kazakhstan because the examples I just described, the first McDonald in Moscow and the Hollywood-like strip in downtown Tehran, these examples are typical and characteristics of what today is appropriately called soft power, of which the West and the United States are masters and kings. Soft power used to undermine at its roots the culture of a country or of a people. Actually, not the whole of the United States and not the whole of Europe, but it is the soft power of the ruling elites and of the deep state, including subservient academic followers who teach in schools that there are no races, while simultaneously suggesting, as I have shown in a previous episode, that the white race ought to be eliminated, that the standards for passing school examination ought to be lowered so that everyone can pass the exam, that sex is a construct, that the family is an instrument of paternalistic oppression, that there are no nations but only individuals, that there should be no borders, and so on. Incidentally, an initiative is currently underway in the state of New York to grant the right to vote to illegal aliens. And for a long time now, calling an illegal alien illegal is a sign of racial discrimination. The correct term is, as everybody knows, is undocumented alien. The soft power I refer to cannot by itself overturn a state, but it can transform innocent victims into unconscious pawn of wickedness. Unconscious pawn of wickedness. Much money is required to make sure that soft power filters through the ganglia, and attacks the vital organs of the state, much as a cancer attacks the body, just as it happened openly and blatantly in Ukraine in 2014. A frankly disgusting representative of this soft power is, or was, the envoy of the U.S. State Department, Victoria Nuland, at the time of the Ukrainian coup. In turn, she is the worthy wife of Robert Kagan, author of the program Strategy for a New American Century, who called for a new Pearl Harbor not long before 9/11. Nuland, when asked whether European nations may object to the United States deciding who should make up the new Iranian government after the coup, answered with an expression as well that I will refrain from quoting after my inviolable respect for the ladies. The same woman, who after the coup in Ukraine said, and I quote, "We have spent $5 billion to achieve this and other objectives," where this objective is the coup, and she omitted to say which were the other objectives. And to add insult to injury, the same Victoria Nuland, now part of the Biden gang, was sent to Moscow quite recently to discuss the situation in Ukraine. Now, finally getting to Kazakhstan, how much soft power was at work in this recent upheaval, destructions and massacres? How much it was at work may be difficult to measure, but some was definitely involved. I received information about the upheavals from friends who know the area well, and much of the information is already known, though some details may perhaps shed some more light on the whole event. Even so, I will only deal with the essentials of what was conveyed to me, As for the price increase of liquid gas, which was the purported trigger of the riots, it is true that state subsidies were removed, but according to my source, the expectations was that individual stations would yes increase the price, but not outright double it, which is a recipe for doubling the natural discontent. Inside plotting is suspected, and as it is known, some bigwigs in the government security system have already been arrested for high treason. However, the official reason for the dramatic price increase was due to the price cap being applied not only at the gas stations, but at the source, meaning the extractors, the producers, and the refiners. In turn, the producers, due to the price caps, were not incentivized, at least this is the line they will learn, were not incentivized to establish better networks of distribution, which resulted in frequent fuel shortages. Therefore, the elimination of the subsidy was also intended to better the liquid gas distribution system. It was predicted that the elimination of the subsidies would cause the price to rise from 60 tenge per unit of fuel to 85 tenge. By the way, there are currently 435 tenge in a dollar. And for the curious, the word tenge is a Turkic term meaning a set of scales. Also for the curious, why do the Kazakhs or the Kazakhs use liquid gas instead of fuel? Because most of the petrol is exported and therefore is expensive, much more than liquid gas, even before and after the removal of the price subsidies. And, incidentally but meaningful, the major petrol extracting and exploiting companies in Kazakhstan are now American or European, such as British Petroleum, Exxon Mobil, and other multinationals. One very important protagonist of the Kazakh scene is the ex-president Nursultan Nazarbayev, who already communist president of Kazakhstan during the Soviet era, after the sudden dissolution of the Soviet Union, instantly transformed himself into the capitalist ruler of a now independent Kazakhstan. A conversion that included assigning or actually giving away and giving control of the most lucrative public companies, now become private, to various members of his family. He and his better half, according to Forbes magazine, are worth $3.1 billion each, or if you like, $6.2 billion altogether, without counting the worth and value of all other profitable enterprises assigned or gifted to daughters, relatives, and sons-in-law. To say that Nursultan Nazarbayev had and still has a cult of personality complex would be an understatement. The capital city of Kazakhstan, formerly Astana, is now called Nur-Sultan, first name of Nazarbayev. And this happened quite recently in March 2019. One of Mr. Nazarbayev's political heroes and inspirer is actually Charles de Gaulle. Of de Gaulle, Nazarbayev wants to imitate the process whereby he caused France to transition from the Fourth to the Fifth Republic. And Nazarbayev has even written a book titled The Kazakhstan Way, in which he describes how to apply the political principle and wisdom of Charles de Gaulle to the Kazakh nation. Nazarbayev also got Kazakhstan to participate in a number of international organizations. For example, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the Commonwealth of Independent States, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the one that just saved the nation from falling into chaos, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and most suspiciously, the NATO's North Atlantic Cooperation Council and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization Partnership for Peace Program. Now, a NATO Partnership for Peace Program rings like a quotation out of Orwell's 1984, at least in my view. Last year, a piece of Kazakh news, little known or publicized in the West, caught my attention. In Kazakhstan, there are two official languages and some others minor. The two official languages are Russian and Kazakh or Kazakhi. Kazakhstan became part of the Russian Empire in the 19th century, well before the establishment of the Soviet Union. Therefore, dissolving the Soviet Union was not just like the end of communism, but it meant actually a substantial dissolution of the core structure of the Russian Empire, at least in Asia. Before becoming part of the Russian Empire, Kazakhstan was essentially a nomad's land, to the point that the very word Kazakhstan means land of the nomads. And we could properly say that the Russian Empire gave Kazakhstan a local habitation and a name, as well as converting what could be considered a tribal into a formal and official language. And as of today, both the Russian and Kazakh are the official languages, and both use Cyrillic characters. But last year, news came from Kazakhstan that the Cyrillic characters of the Kazakh language will be converted into English, or if you like Latin characters, and Russian would be removed as an official language of Kazakhstan. Although in itself the news seems to have no political implications, I think that it does. It is, in my view, a blatant example of soft power applied from the outside by we know who. Not only this Nur-Sultan Nazarbayev changed the name of the capital from Astana to his own name in 2019. Now Astana is called Nur-Sultan. And in 2010, Nazarbayev founded in the capital a new and now the most important university of Kazakhstan, where the language spoken in the classes and books is only English. Both events, change in language characters and adoption of English only in the now most important university, are, in my opinion, clear evidence of soft power at work. And the whole has the ring of an initiative that does not come from the base to the top, but from the top to the base. And it is soft power at its most obvious. For one, at least strictly from the educational point of view, Russia still is ahead of many countries. And paradoxically, the very space center of Baikonur, an example of masterful Russian technology, is in Kazakhstan. And there can be no superior technology without superior education. I think we all agree. Along with these developments, my contact reports that there is a change of attitude in the Kazakh population, especially among the young, a tendency towards Western behavior, again, the product of soft power. Notably, and I quote him almost verbatim, a breakdown of a certain spirit of egalitarianism and a drift towards materialism, individualism, consumerism, the cult of wealth, and the notion this ostentatious wealth is the ideal means of self-expression. Were these changes sufficient to justify or sustain a so-called color revolution in Kazakhstan, as it occurred in Georgia and Ukraine? Probably not, considering that after Georgia and Ukraine, Russia, at least as observed from a point of view of the man in the street, has clearly undertaken some effective defensive measure. One acknowledged and self-described leader of the attempted Kazakh revolution is or was a character by the name of Mukhtar Ablyazov, who for a time was Minister of Industry and Commerce and later a figure of the opposition to Nazarbayev, and then later a political refugee in France. He was the president of two Kazakh banks before being condemned for fraud, theft of public resources, and even mafia-style execution of his enemies. Needless to say, he was and is a billionaire and a true product of neoliberal philosophy. And during the recent Kazakh upheaval, he used the social media, curiously uncensored, no censorship in this case. He used the social media to whip up protesters into a frenzy. However, after the unfavorable turn of events in Kazakhstan, he said he had nothing to do with the protests and the killings and the decapitations. He removed his post from the internet. But we shouldn't be surprised. Insolence is generally a characteristic of those whose baseness inclines them to think nothing insupportable that produces gain. One of the many other doubtful figures of very recent Kazakh history is, or I should say was, a certain Rakat Aliyev, former son-in-law of Nazarbayev, turned his bitter political enemy. No doubt a billionaire himself, he had two Kazakh bankers, a Kazakh TV lady announcer, and a few other enemies executed. He then escaped to Austria, where he was incarcerated into a top security 24-day security jail. And much like Epstein in America, he was found dead in his cell. Yet another tool into the CIA's portfolio of hell, rather than soft power, is Islamic fundamentalism. Used, let's not forget, against Afghanistan when the country got as close as to a lay society as it ever did, so far. But Reagan called the Islamist radical, he called them freedom fighters. And then with Osama bin Laden, the Islamist radicals became temporarily useless, but were resurrected again during the assassination of Gaddafi and the destruction of Libya, Iraq, and Syria. Because we should recognize the genius of the CIA and its various unnamed sister organizations. The genius at being able to use and finance the same radical Islamists both as friends and enemies, or even simultaneously as it fits the program, just as it happened in Syria, Iraq, and Libya. Returning to soft power, Russia's soft power, at least as the average citizen could detect, couldn't even compare with the soft power of the United States. For one, Russia does not have a Hollywood, an industry whose product is the very degradation of man. Yet, I think it is good for mankind, that Russia, at least so far, does not seem to have a Hollywood equivalent. However effective the degenerative soft power of Hollywood may be from the domineering imperialistic point of view. Because certain characteristics of man or of a society, characteristics that are promoted, praised, and admired, still secretly and imperceptibly upon the admirers. And by an injudicious fondness or thoughtless vanity, these characteristics are then adopted by design at large. Furthermore, soft power is as old as Greek mythology. In Homer's Odyssey, Ulysses' companions are seduced by the soft power of the sorceress Circe, who quickly turns them into pigs. And if we look at most products of Hollywood and their producers, and then we think of Circe's pigs, it is really hard to see a difference. Thank you for watching. And if you like the series, you can subscribe on YouTube or follow me on Twitter @JimmyMolia. And as always, may all the number of the stars give light to your fair way. Good night.